Hello, I'm Tim Loyola. This is obviously a special edition of Imagine the Text. Someone emailed me after watching one of the Ephesians videos and wrote, "Something I would find helpful is a clarification, an explanation of your view and use of imagination." In other words, why do I call my YouTube channel Imagine the Text instead of something around Bible study, study the text, or even exegete the text? And why do I refer to imagination so often in my videos? Well, here's my first shot at answering this question. This is Imagine the Text, where we stay as closely connected to the text of Scripture as possible as the primary way to engage and stimulate our imaginations. So why imagination? Why imagine the text? I can think of no better way to begin than by quoting Peter Kreeft, who simply and powerfully says, "The Bible is a work of imagination." Yeah, I'd like to unpack that a little bit, starting with imagination itself. Most people associate the imagination with make-believe and fiction. It's something that moves us outside of, and sometimes even in the opposite direction of, what is real. When we're kids, it's the stuff of imaginary friends and pretend. And even as adults, we use imagination only for things like creating art or for storytelling, right? But this is a very narrow view. While the imagination can certainly take us beautifully into fantasy, our imaginations can bring us just as beautifully into reality, to see and grasp and even live within the real. In his description of imagination, A.W. Tozer says, just part of it, this gift, imagination, permits us to know that which the senses can never tell us. For by it we are able to see through sense impressions to the reality that lies behind things. Our imagination is what gives us the ability to see and construe the reality behind things. And I think this includes Scripture. So, how is it that the Bible is a work of imagination? I'd like to mention just a couple of ways. First of all, the Bible is written language, obviously. And all language depends on the imagination. Language is entirely symbol, a system of signs and signifiers held in these little beautiful things we call words. And our ability to go beyond just, looking at words as we read, or just hearing the sound of words as we listen to someone speak, as you're doing right now, and to get to any kind of meaning requires the imagination. And one of the main reasons this is the case is because all words have slippage and play and range to their meaning. There is no such thing as the definition. And this always engages our imagination to see possible meanings, different meanings, even multiple meanings. And this is why I love looking up the definitions of words, either in a Hebrew or Greek lexicon or in the English dictionary. It always stimulates our imaginations around words. Not only does language contain words, but it also involves grammar and syntax. One of the main things our imagination gives us the ability to do is to make connections between things. things. And grammar and syntax are all about connections. Connecting words into clauses, clauses into phrases, phrases into sentences, and so on. It takes imagination to be able to see and make those connections. This is why I love using relational layouts. It's a wonderful and creative way to engage our imaginations around grammar and syntax. Now, all of this is true no matter what written text we connect to. The thing about the text of Scripture is that it is especially image-rich. First of all, it's foreign language to the vast majority of us: Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. 3 beautiful languages that I believe provide abundant resources for the imagination. On top of that, the sheer number and diversity of forms and genres within the overarching narrative of Scripture are really testament to God's own imagination. And so our imagination is the main way we enter the world of the biblical text. Above, and really way beyond, its use in the language of Scripture, I believe our imagination is actually the main faculty we use to connect to God Himself. I love the absolute way that Garrett Green puts it. He says, God has chosen to reveal Himself in the world in a manner accessible only to imagination. Wow. Now, how is this the case? Well, consider the way the Oxford Dictionary defines imagination. Notice we're engaging our imaginations around the word imagination. They define it as the faculty or action of forming new ideas or images or concepts of external objects not present to the senses, e.g., God Himself. This sounds a whole lot like faith to me, especially the way the writer of Hebrews describes it. Faith is what makes real the things we hope for. It is proof of what we cannot see. Faith and imagination are intertwined. The way I like to picture it is that imagination is the engine that drives and empowers faith. And so whenever we engage Scripture specifically as believers, we always use our imaginations. Now finally, I want to say a word about imagination and interpreting the Bible, which is really what my videos are all about. Whenever we engage any written text, we're always asking ourselves, what does this mean? It's my belief here as well that we always use imagination to get to meaning, whether we're aware of it or not. C.S. Lewis calls imagination the organ of meaning. By explicitly, and as you know, frequently, referring to imagination in my videos, I'm not only wanting to bring awareness to what is already happening, but also to encourage the intentional use of imagination as we interpret the biblical text. The reason I don't use Bible study or exegesis or even exposition, even though these may be elements of what I'm doing, is because to me they imply an ideal that I think is impossible. That is, that we can remove ourselves from the interpretive process and somehow draw objectively the meaning of the text. No. we are inextricably involved. Yeah, big word there. We're inevitably, unavoidably involved. We always bring ourselves into the interpretation of Scripture. Not only is this the way it is, I believe it's the way God designed it to be. Now, obviously, this doesn't mean it's a free-for-all, that anything goes when we interpret Scripture. I think the use of good exegetical method, especially staying as closely connected to the text of Scripture as possible, provides necessary boundaries and direction for imagination. And I try to model this in my videos. Imagine you have bought tickets to go see a professional orchestra, and on the playlist is one of your favorites, Beethoven's Symphony No. 5. So you're, super excited about it. And sure enough, the performance does not disappoint. It was done beautifully. Majestically. And as you reflect on it later, it dawns on you that what made this performance so good is that it was different than any other performance or recording you've heard. It was unmistakably Beethoven's Symphony No. 5. But you recognize and appreciate that this performance was unique. Gadamer calls this reproduction and production. There has to be reproduction in order for you to recognize and enjoy it as Beethoven's Fifth. But it's not entirely reproduction. In fact, it's impossible for every performance to be an exact reproduction, right? These musicians and conductor at this particular place, at this showing, inevitably are putting themselves into it. And so this particular performance of Beethoven's Fifth bears their unique, creative, imaginative stamp. Every performance is also a production, just as we expect it to be. The same thing is true when we interpret Scripture. We honor and pursue reproduction when we stay closely connected to the text. But we cannot simply or entirely reproduce a disconnected, objective, correct meaning. We are inevitably involved. And so our engagement always includes production of the biblical text. Good interpretation of the Bible always has elements of reproduction and production. And I choose to describe this beautiful combination by saying that we imagine the text. Well, that's all I'll say now. There's a lot more I could do with imagination. Let me know if you'd like to hear more. Otherwise, for now, so long.